Pep Guardiola overthinking it in a cup final. Who'd have thought it?
We couldn't work out who was playing in midfield for Manchester City because there was no conventional midfielder.
I thought it was a really strange selection. Really, really odd.
But I think Guardiola's lack of reaction, I think, can be used as a stick to beat him with, especially when the manager, as you've already alluded to, the opposition comes out and says, if you play like that again, we will beat you.
Yeah, I think he'll have to reflect on that and wonder what he could have done different.
Jack Grealish, in particular, was not happy with his lack of involvement. Clearly, he doesn't have faith in Grealish when it comes to the biggest games.
He has to leave. It's as simple as that.
Crystal Palace making history as they earn their first ever FA Cup.
I think Oliver Glasner is the perfect example that if you have a philosophy and your players can execute it properly, it works.
This is a winner, and he expects his players to have that mentality as well.
I mean, it was definitely a denying of a goal-scoring opportunity. There's no doubt about it. I can't get my head around it. I don't think anyone can. I don't think he was doing his best to explain it, but the truth is it was a major failure, I think.
I think it's a case of refereeing the occasion and not, just sticking by the rule book. You can't not send a player off just because it's the FA Cup final. It clearly was a goal-scoring opportunity, and it should have been a red card.
Time to get into the FA Cup final with talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook and Kevin Hatchard, the European football expert. Crystal Palace glad all over. Manchester City going to end the season without any silverware for the first time since Pep Guardiola's first season in charge. How did it all unfold? We'll get into that very shortly. First of all, this weekend's been quite an emotional weekend for fans of Crystal Palace and others. Alex Crook has been all sentimental. He said to me, "Ask me at the top, Sam, what my takeaway is from the weekend."
Yeah, and you thought I'd had one too many glasses of red wine in the hotel before we
did.
fell. It just felt to me like this was the weekend when football found its soul again. You know, I thought Crystal Palace winning at Wembley, what it meant to their supporters, former players, and obviously the current crop who've made history. You had the Goodison Park farewell, bidding goodbye in a very emotional scene to one of the grand old arenas in English football, and great scenes at Leicester, whose fans have not had too much to cheer about, with Jamie Vardy getting the perfect send-off as well. So I think this season, actually, we spoke about it on Thursday. We called it the year of the underdog, with Newcastle winning the League Cup. Palace have now won the FA Cup. Forest have put themselves in a position where they can get Champions League football. The way it's going, Tottenham will probably win the Europa League.
Probably. I know you don't want that to happen. And even there's a part of me that doesn't want it to happen either, because my little boy's a massive Manchester United fan. He got all decked out in his finery last week, had to go to the megastore to get a flag because he's so excited about it. Kevin, of course, you will say that football will finally get his soul back the moment that Virgil van Dijk lifts the Premier League title, which will be on Sunday of this week. So maybe it's this week that happens. But look, it has been a very emotional weekend for a lot of people, I think, especially that Goodison Park experience, which the pictures were amazing. I mean, the way the team was welcomed, then inside the stadium, then all of those legends, those people from yesteryear, and then Andy Gray coming up with that brilliant phrase right at the very end of that presentation where he says, we may be leaving Goodison, but Goodison will never leave us. I mean, it's just terrific, Kevin.
Yeah, and I think these things are so important because it's not only about emotion, but it's about history and it's about long-term investment in your club. And you look at those Palace fans, I know we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail, but, they've waited for this for generations. The club had never won a major trophy, so to do that is enormous for them, enormous for the area. And if you broaden it out more widely, look at what Brest have done in France, qualifying for the Champions League, making the knockout phase. Had never qualified for Europe before. Look at what Girona did in Spain. They qualified for the Champions League last season as well. It's so important for the health of the sport that clubs that do not normally win trophies, compete for trophies, qualify for Europe. It's so important they continue to do so, because the biggest danger to the sport is a cartel, is a small number of clubs, and it's impossible for anybody else to win anything.
And therefore, this debate that has been raging about the Europa League final winners getting a place in the Champions League is actually really important to push back against, right? Because leveling up comes from people progressing through the system. And okay, it's Tottenham and Manchester United this time around, but the progression for Manchester United here was Europa League via winning the FA Cup, then via winning the FA Cup, they get into the Europa League, win that. If they do, they get into the Champions League. That's the progression of that gives the FA Cup some legitimacy as well. So that the idea of rewarding these teams and making sure that there is a pathway for growth for these mid-table teams. I'm not saying that Manchester United and Tottenham are that, but you get the point. Your Bournemouth, your Brentford, they can see a pathway for them. Crystal Palace, that does give you the opportunity to join in with the big boys. It levels the playing field a bit. It's never going to level it properly. But as you say, that's vital for the health of the sport going forward. Certainly, Crystal Palace are in a healthy position. There might be a bit of a boardroom change in the summer. But right now, they're just glad all over that for the first time in 119 years, they have won the FA Cup. Crystal Palace making history as they earn their first ever FA Cup, thanks to a goal from Eberici Eze. And before we go into sort of like what happened, why it happened, what it means, etc., can we just take a minute to eulogise about that goal? This is a goal that started deep inside the Palace half, almost on the goal line in the right fullback area, Crook.
It was the perfect Crystal Palace goal in terms of how they play, in terms of what they wanted Manchester City to do, which was dominate possession and then use the pace they have in their ranks to hit on the counter-attack. It starts with a brilliant ball out from defence. The pass into Eze is perfectly weighted. And the finish, with the pressure that goes with it, the occasion, the fact it's in an FA Cup final, it was perfect. And obviously then Dean Henderson takes centre stage, but it was a goal worthy of winning the cup final. And we talk a lot about managers and their principles and ideologies and are certain managers too attached to one system. I think Oliver Glasner is the perfect example that if you have a philosophy and your players can execute it properly, it works. It certainly worked for Palace at the weekend. It worked in the semi-final against Villa as well.
And he knows it works because he turned around in the press conference after they'd lost 5-2 at Manchester City, Kevin, and said, if you play like that again, we'll get you. And they did.
They did. And it's his innate belief, which I think has really rubbed off on so many of his players and everyone at Palace, I think. If you look at his career in general, he's always overachieved. He's always made people believe they could achieve things that they hadn't before. If you go back to Lask in Austria, he managed to get them into the top flight, managed to get them into Europe. Nobody saw that coming. If you look at what he did with Wolfsburg, he got them into the Champions League against the odds. And if you look at Frankfurt, not only did he win the Europa League, but he also got them to a DFB Pokal final. And they didn't quite do the same as Palace did on the day, but he managed to get them to a final. This is a winner. And he expects his players to have that mentality as well. And I think if a coach can prove it works time and time again, that's going to win the players over. And I think Crook is absolutely right. If you have a philosophy, it's about having a little bit of flexibility within that. But if you can show the players it works and you can teach them all the intricacies of it, then eventually it's going to come good. And I thought that goal was an archetypal Glasner goal. You know, that initial surge through the middle, then out, then back in. That's what he's done for so long and so effectively.
Terrific. And he's a winner, but he's also great at making connections as well. And he has special connections because he also plays at Wimbledon. Yes, on the tennis courts. He can't play, he's told me, and on the grass this year until the end of the tournament, but he's hoping to do that before the end of the summer because he knows someone who can get him in there. But you can only play there 7 times a year if you're not, you know, a very special person. But he's looking to do that. So he's also a very accomplished tennis player as well. How are they going to keep hold of him, Crook?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously building up to the final, there were whispers even from within the Palace dressing room. There was a real fear that he might head back to Germany. Kev will know that he's very much on the radar for Leipzig. But then you hear the comments from Steve Parish afterwards, and okay, it's in the afterglow winning the FA Cup, but he was quite bullish. He said, look, he's going to be here for another year. We'll try and tie him down to a new contract, but he will stay. So let's see what happens.
But he's also got an issue then in how he sort of configures the team, Kev, because I think that one of the sort of prizes for success, the sort of downsides of success, is that everybody knows now that you've got a good group of players that have got a winning mentality, players that can probably play at a higher level with all due respect. And that's when the cherry pickers start to come.
Yeah, and that's going to happen because you're going to get people looking at Wharton, you're going to get people looking at Eze, you're going to get people looking at Mateta. I think there's a little warning for some of those players, because I think what Glasner has done is he's got the absolute most out of them within that system. None of them are perfect players. I think Wharton, of all of them, actually has the highest ceiling. I think he's going to be a superstar in the long run. He's still very early in that journey in some ways, but I think they do have to be careful, because you come away from that environment, and it applies to Glasner as well with Leipzig. You come away from what they've built, you come away from that environment. It's not guaranteed you're going to be successful. And we've seen that time and time again. Players make the wrong move, they make a move too quickly. And Glasner has to look across at Leipzig and think, I mean, I commentated on their final game on Saturday, and it was it had many twists and turns, which is why my throat's gone. That added to Eurovision. And the hate.
Were you singing?
No, which is good for everybody involved, I have to say.
I don't know, after what I've seen.
But look, I think the thing with that is that Leipzig, that's a total rebuild. That club's a mess at the moment. They failed to qualify for Europe, and they don't have much patience with coaches. So he'd have to be very, very careful about considering whether to make a move there or not.
Interesting to see what happens there. Adam Wharton and Mark Gay ended up missing the celebrations. Actually, Gay was around for the celebrations, but they missed the party late on. Wharton went to hospital with a concussion. There was a bruised eye for Mark Gay. At one stage, they thought he might have fractured his eye socket. He's escaped that, but it was very bruised. I don't know if you saw afterwards, he had a massive, great big bulge around his left eye where he'd taken a whack in the penalty area. It was one of those situations, actually, where you felt a bit sorry for Adam Wharton because he got smacked in the ball by Kevin De Bruyne, and then Kevin De Bruyne ran up to him and said, "Get up!" And then 3 hours later, he's in hospital sending an Instagram post saying he doesn't remember anything after that moment. So, sometimes we do need to be a little bit careful with these players when they've suffered head injuries on the field of play. But he was terrific, Wharton, I thought, in the middle of the park. Absolute class. And actually, that midfield combination of Kamada and Wharton was superb in the semi-final, and they were superb in the final. Now, I think if you'd gone back 6 months or even 6 weeks and said to a Crystal Palace fan, we're going to play Daichi Kamada in the middle of the park in the FA Cup final, they'd have been like, who's missing? But no, he'd earned the respect of the supporters and the rest of the team by his performances in recent weeks and that partnership that he's developed with Adam Wharton. What was really strange, though, Crook, is that when we got the team sheet, we couldn't work out who was playing in midfield for Manchester City because there was no conventional midfielder. I suppose Silva and De Bruyne were supposed to be the two deepest players. I suppose they wanted Nico O'Reilly to come into a midfield position from left back, but it didn't work.
Pep Guardiola overthinking it in a cup final. Who'd have thought it? It was strange, the team sheet. And I've been told in the last 24 hours that Jack Grealish in particular was not happy with his lack of involvement, particularly when they were really struggling to break Palace down the second half. So interesting to see what happens with him this summer. We know that City don't want to loan him out. Obviously, they're going to lose a few players. So I think Pep would like to keep him around. But clearly, he doesn't have faith in Grealish when it comes to the biggest games. He went with Haaland and Marmoush, which again, I think maybe took us by surprise. They dominated possession, and had Haaland scored the early chance when Henderson made the save, who knows, it might well have gone Manchester City's way. But I think Guardiola's lack of reaction once Palace had taken the lead, and particularly in that second half when they weren't really creating chances, I think can be used as a stick to beat him with, especially when the manager, as you've already alluded to, the opposition comes out and says, look, if you play like that again, we will beat you. And that's exactly what Pep did.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it got to sort of 75 minutes and we were saying, why hasn't he made a change yet? And Ali McCoy, I would have made one by now because we're going through the same process here. And Pep afterwards says, we played really well, but we just didn't score. And but the ultimate analysis of football is that scoreboard in the corner. That's the key thing. It doesn't matter how you play sometimes. It actually matters that you get over the line. And, okay, Henderson's had a brilliant Cup final, full of stories, and we'll get to that in just a second. But he's also been he's made a couple of good saves, but he's not been peppered every single 5 minutes, which I think is an issue. And Jack Grealish, the story is really interesting because I don't think they want to loan him out, but I do think they'll sell him if they get the opportunity. But selling him is really difficult, right? Because getting the right price for him and someone to take his wages is going to be nigh on impossible. I mean, we've seen it work with Marcus Rashford, so actually maybe it isn't impossible. But by bringing on someone who's never played for the club before, who's 19 years of age and has never even put on a Manchester City shirt before in an FA Cup final, and leaving Jack Grealish on the bench, you are sending a very strong message, Kevin.
He has to leave. It's as simple as that. I think when you get to that point, I mean, you're in it for these major finals, you're in it to try and win trophies, and he's been a peripheral figure. And for him to be overlooked in that way, given the game state, given what he can usually bring to a team, I think that's a signal that he has to at least try and pursue a move away from the club in the summer. I agree with you. I thought the balance in the midfield was wrong. It felt like Pep expected to have lots of the ball and expected to be on the attack the whole time. That's fine. But in a final, the first goal is so important. And I think if you have Nico Gonzalez on the pitch, maybe he can disrupt that Palace move that leads to the Eze goal. We'll never know. But I just think time and time again, you see that De Bruyne and Silva combination in midfield, and there's too many gaps. You know, they're getting towards a stage where they can't cover that ground quite in the same way as they once did. And we've seen him slip up in this way time and time again. And when you look at Palace, a lot of their stuff, at least initially, goes through the middle. So I thought it was a really strange selection. Really, really odd. And he's done this before. We've seen it in big Champions League ties throughout his career, not just at City, but at Bayern, where he's picked lineups that haven't quite worked. Obviously, the perfect example of that is that Champions League final against Chelsea, where he just emptied the midfield and it just didn't work. So, yeah, I think he'll have to reflect on that and wonder what he could have done differently.
I was trying to work out actually why Kovacic wasn't in the team, because he has been playing recently. He's been playing well. He played brilliantly in the semi-final. And I think that, listen, one of the reporters told me afterwards that he was rested, and I couldn't work out if that was a direct quote or had just been told that or whatever, but I just couldn't get my head around that. I was completely baffled as to why you wouldn't play someone like that in an FA Cup final who has done so well for you and adds that solidity and can disrupt that midfield area, especially against a team who, as we've already said, have got two very good midfield players who are currently in their pomp. What they did do is they did force Dean Henderson to come out of his penalty area and handle the ball 5 yards outside the box. It wasn't 5 yards, it was a yard or so, but it was definitely a denying of a goal-scoring opportunity. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I spoke to Chris Foy, former Premier League referee, yesterday on my Sunday session programme, and he said, look, I would have given a straight red card there, but once the VAR gets involved in it, he's got to look at this, that, and the other, and he decided that the ball was going in a different direction. I tried to say to him, but it was only going to a different direction because Henderson swatted it, and he said, yeah, but all that has to be taken into... Look, I can't get my head around it. I don't think anyone can. I don't think he was doing his best to explain it, but the truth is it was a major failure, I think.
I think it's a case of refereeing the occasion and not, just sticking by the rule book, because only 6 players have ever been sent off in FA Cup finals. I think if it's a bog standard Premier League Championship game, even an earlier round in the FA Cup, it's a red card. Because the reason that Haaland is forced away from goal is because Henderson's, as you've said, perfect word, swatted the ball, pushed it out wide. He's outside the penalty area. It clearly was a goal-scoring opportunity, and it should have been a red card. I'm glad it wasn't, because I think the cup final would have taken a very different turn then, but you can't not send a player off just because it's the FA Cup final. He had to go.
And of course, then Dean Henderson becomes centre stage, makes the penalty save from Omar Marmoush. Why didn't Haaland take it, Kevin?
Yeah, it's a really strange one. And I thought Pep Guardiola was quite woolly about it afterwards. He was kind of saying, well, it's up to the players what they decide. But I find it very strange that, Marmoush is generally, no, it doesn't look like it because he's had a penalty save, but generally a strong penalty taker, generally a great striker of the ball. But what was interesting, I thought, was that Dean Henderson was absolutely adamant afterwards that if Haaland had taken it, he wouldn't have been so sure about which way he was going to go. He absolutely knew where Marmoush was going to go. And Marmoush does have a tendency to try and, with his right foot, whip it across the
Strike
goalkeeper.
it across his body,
Yeah. So there is that tendency, but that's not to say Marmoush isn't a great striker of the ball and doesn't score penalties, because he does. But I do find it strange that if you have a striker who has ambitions to be the top goal scorer in world football and one of the greatest that's ever played the game, to not take a penalty in a cup final, I find very jarring, because I cannot imagine Kane, Lewandowski, Mbappe, any of those guys going, here you go, you have the ball. It's just not going to happen.
I obviously did a sort of penalty analysis before the game, sort of see like what, who takes what penalties or whatever. And I was just actually zooming in there just to have a look at what I'd written about it. I think he's at 51 penalties, Erling Haaland. He's only missed 9 of them, something like that. But he has missed 3 penalties in the last 7 that he's taken. And I wonder if that penalty that he missed down at the Vitality Stadium in the quarterfinal was still playing on his mind, because that was the last time he took one, just a couple of months ago. And sometimes when you're in that situation, you haven't taken one, you've just come back from injury. Do you want to, I don't know, do you want to risk it?
Push through. You've got to push through and keep taking them, because that's what the top strikers do. That's what the top goal scorers do. Can you imagine Mo Salah, if he'd missed 3 in a row, for example, going, I don't fancy the 4th? No, he'd be grabbing that ball and going again. So I have a huge amount of respect for Haaland. I think he's a wonderful player, but I was very surprised that he was willing to give that up.
Okay, congratulations to Crystal Palace. Be interested to see what happens in the summer with them. Josh Harris, David Blitzer, their 36% share looks to be up for grabs. John Texter is trying to buy it, but then he's been trying to buy everything for a little while and he hasn't got anything out of it yet. Woody Johnson, who is the New York Jets owner, has been lurking in the background as well. He went to the Nottingham Forest game a little while ago. Steve Parish said maybe winning the FA Cup might be the drop the mic moment for him. Oliver Glasner is sought after. They've got no sporting director because Dougie Freeman's heading off to Saudi Arabia. They've changed COO and CFO in the last couple of months as well. So it is a period of change at Crystal Palace now. Can they build on that FA Cup final win? Let's get to the top 5 race, because that got really interesting this weekend. The Premier League race for the top 5 continues apace, and defeats this weekend for Newcastle United. Manchester City didn't play. Obviously, they played Tuesday night live on talkSPORT. Chelsea won on Friday. So did Aston Villa. And Nottingham Forest beat West Ham United. It's really going down to the wire, Crook.
It's fascinating. And obviously, we're in a position where we're trying to pick which games we should really focus our final day coverage on. And we're not really going to know the answer until after Tuesday night. Manchester City need to beat Bournemouth. And, on paper, you'd say City have got Bournemouth and Fulham last 2 games of the season. They're going to win those and get in the Champions League. Couldn't score against Southampton. They've just lost the FA Cup final. I'm not sure Bournemouth are the perfect team you want to be playing when you're in desperate need of the point. So that's going to be absolutely fascinating. I think fair play to Forest. 16 minutes of added time. They've managed to grind out an important victory that at least gives them a puncher's chance when it comes to Champions League, if they can beat Chelsea. I spoke to Eddie Howe after the game at Arsenal. He was naturally disappointed that Newcastle had lost that game, but equally he was pleased that they dictate their own fortunes. If they beat Everton at home, and you've got to think that Everton have probably used up all their emotion with that final game at Goodison, they're going to be in the Champions League. And then you've got Aston Villa, who deserve a Champions League place next season when you look at what they've brought to the Premier League and to the Champions League as well this year. But 2 teams have got to miss out. It's brilliant. It's kept the season alive, and we need it, don't we? Because the title race has been so drab, and so's the relegation battle.
I mean, look, 66 points Newcastle, 66 points Chelsea, 66 points Aston Villa, 65 points Manchester City. They've got an extra game on Tuesday night, as we've mentioned. And 65 points Nottingham Forest. I mean, it couldn't be tighter. Basically, Nottingham Forest, you would think, because of their goal difference, because of the fact that they've got the least amount of points, they'd be a little bit concerned that they are not going to make it. Yet, if they beat Chelsea, Chelsea end up finishing 7th. So Chelsea can go from 4th to 7th. It's a proper playoff between those two. If Nottingham Forest win that game, that's their prize at home against a team who let's be honest, struggle to score against Manchester United and don't have Nicholas Jackson, then they'll be in the Champions League next. Well, they'll be in the top 6 next season, but they might be in the Champions League depending on the results elsewhere. But they'll certainly take Chelsea down a peg or two. And Chelsea finishing 7th is massive for Brighton, Brentford, Bournemouth, because those teams could still get into Europe in 8th position if Chelsea win the Europa Conference League and finish outside the top 6. But it's possible now, right? Because Nottingham Forest just have to beat them. So that didn't look likely yesterday when we walked into the Emirates, but it is possible now.
It's a bit of a nightmare scenario, I think, for Chelsea, the way it's turned out, because the fact that Forest are in the mix and can give themselves a real chance if they win the game. It depends how Chelsea approach it as well, because Forest, obviously, as we've seen, love to contain and counter. But a point might, Chelsea have got to look around and see what's going on elsewhere as well. I have a feeling Chelsea are going to miss out. I may be massively wrong about that, but I have a feeling they might miss out. I also have a feeling they're not going to find that Conference League final anywhere near as straightforward as everybody seems to think. That means a hell of a lot to Betis. There's a very similar scenario to Palace City in the FA Cup. This is enormous for Betis. Never been in a European final before. Really smart coach in Pellegrini. All the pressure on Chelsea. Everybody expects Chelsea to win it. They've expected Chelsea to win it from the get-go. I don't think that's anywhere near as straightforward as people think. So we'll see what Chelsea are made of in the next 2 games, because it's a huge test for Maresca. He keeps telling us how we shouldn't expect them to qualify for the Champions League. He keeps telling us how, since I've been here, we haven't really spent that much more money than anybody else. Yeah, you did spend a lot beforehand, though. I still think Villa can make it because they've got the perfect fixture in a way, because win, lose or draw, United, I think, will be there for the taking. They'll either be celebrating the Europa League final win, or they'll be demoralised from losing it. So, yeah, I think it could be Newcastle, City and Villa, and it could be both Forest and Chelsea miss out.
I told Crook yesterday that Betis would probably win the Conference League final because no Spanish team has lost a club final since 2001, and they've played quite a few of them. And also, Maresca used to play for Seville, and Betis would love nothing more than to spoil his day. Look, there's so many sort of subplots, and we will get into that final next week, when this time next week, Chelsea will be heading to Wroclaw, and we'll be going out there with talkSPORT. All the finals are live on talkSPORT. But Chelsea didn't play brilliantly against Manchester United on Friday night. The first 70 minutes, actually, Manchester United were arguably, especially the first half, the better team in that game. But Chelsea did get the job done. A little bit of skill from Reece James opening up the opportunity for Marc Cucurella, who's been the goal threat. And that's the problem that I'm sort of identifying with them. The fact that they don't really have a goal threat. Cucurella has scored 7 goals, but they've been really important. And especially at the end of this season, where Nicholas Jackson has been suspended. Although he's not the greatest goal scorer in the world, he stretches the pitch, he occupies defenders, that gives space to everybody else. And it is very difficult, seemingly, for them to find goal scoring opportunities at the moment. Let's talk a little bit about Nottingham Forest, because they did get the job done away at West Ham yesterday. They were given a helping hand from Alphonse Areola, but their home form is so good that you'd give them a fighter's chance now, Crook.
You would, and not only is their home form very good, Chelsea's away form, as you know better than anyone, is so bad. So I agree with Kev, nightmare scenario.
Can you two stop trying to wind me up?
Well, I think if Forest had not beaten West Ham, then there would probably be a danger that they would be demoralised come the final day of the season. But I like what Nuno said afterwards, actually. He said, look, we've had a brilliant season. If we qualify for the Champions League, that is a massive bonus. If we don't, we're still in Europe for the first time in 30 years. All the pressure is on Enzo Maresca and Chelsea, because if they don't finish in the top 5, there's a strong argument, and I know you'll be one of the first to make it, that actually Pochettino was sacked for finishing 6th. Why should Maresca keep his job? What progress have we actually seen, particularly if Kev's prediction comes true and Betis win the Conference League final? So, yeah, fantastic for Forest. I mean, ridiculous. There was so much added time at the end of the game, and, this is at the end of a week where Taiwo Awoniyi has been injured as a direct result of the protocol when it comes to VAR. There was a long VAR check for the second Forest goal, far too long. And again, you're risking muscular problems because players shouldn't be playing 106 minutes in a game. So, if West Ham had to come back into it, then I think Nuno and the owner would have had a lot to say about it. Brilliant goal from Jarrod Bowen, by the way. We shouldn't just skirt around that.
Yeah.
He's far too good for West Ham United at this moment in time. But yeah, I think the City ground is going to be absolutely bouncing on Sunday. And I sort of hope Forest do it. I don't think they're a brilliant team to watch. But again, the year of the underdog, they deserve Champions League football.
City might not make the Champions League if they don't beat Bournemouth and don't win against Fulham on the final day of the season.
Yeah, I still think they're going to do it, but they haven't played well. They've had spells where they've looked a little bit more like themselves, but generally the drop-off has been quite extraordinary. But it's not new. We've seen it before. We've seen teams that have dominated and then have had to be renewed, and it does seem like Pep is up for the challenge. They've spent a lot already. I mean, people are talking about, it's going to need a massive rebuild, it's going to need this, going to need that. And they've spent a fair old chunk of cash already, bringing in guys like Marmoush, Kusanov, guys like that.
They have, but they're not using them. Yes.
I mean, I think Kusanov has struggled because he's paired Gvardiol and Diaz, and that's worked really well. And I think that makes more sense. I know Gvardiol's done really well as a kind of rampaging left back, and he's so good on the ball, but he's a top quality centre back, really. And that's where I think his future lies. I think sticking him out at left back, even though it brings some benefits, I think that's not the future for him. But yeah, I mean, the race is going to be just a point on Forest. There's actually something really refreshing about them in the sense that they're very different in the way they approach the game. They're a little bit Inter-esque in the sense that they'll say, right, you can have the ball, you can have loads of shots, we don't care, because we've got pace on the counter, we back our goalkeeper, we back our centre-backs. And I think the thing that's cost them actually in the last few weeks is the centre-backs, Murillo and Milenkovic. Their level has been so high all the way through the season, just dropped off a little bit. Not much, but dropped off a little bit. And that's where the leagues have started to spring. But well done to them for being in it.
Matt Sells made a couple of brilliant saves yesterday as well. Manchester City, we've mentioned. Newcastle United really desperate to get into the Champions League as well. They just lacked a little bit of punch up front after a really good start in their game against Arsenal. Arsenal, as a result of that, almost guaranteed second. Not quite mathematically, because there's a 10-goal swing that could see them end up falling away from that position, but they won't because they're playing Southampton on the final day of the season, with all due respect. But Alexander Isak's probably not going to play next week, Crook.
No, it was a strange one because Eddie Howe, when I spoke to him after the game, said that Isak felt his groin after training, so therefore they didn't take any risks. There is a scan booked in for Monday, which doesn't sound particularly positive, and that is a big blow. Callum Wilson, I think, has had a terrific career, but unfortunately, because of the injuries, because he's in the veteran stage now, doesn't have the same capability to run in behind defences that Isak did, and I think Newcastle really missed that as the game went on Sunday. I still think with home advantage against Everton, they'll be okay. But this might also, and I've raised it before, this might also be an issue when it comes to clubs looking to sign Alexander Isak. The price tag is enormous. So are the wages. He does pick up these niggly injuries, and he has done over the course of his career.
Interestingly, I think this might be the game of next weekend, Newcastle against Everton. David Moyes in charge of Everton, done a brilliant job there. It's got them up to 13th, 14th position in the Premier League. They're going to finish above West Ham. They're going to finish above Manchester United. They're going to finish above Tottenham this season after at one stage looking as if they might be in a relegation battle. They're going to move into the new stadium, very much a Premier League team. But Newcastle United are at home, backed by that crowd. I think that could be the scene on Sunday afternoon, because if they were to not get there, it would be a huge disappointment. But also, if they were to get there, imagine the eruption of joy in that cathedral on the hill. And I just think that he must change that formation, and I think he probably will do. He can't play Callum Wilson, who, with all due respect, offered nothing yesterday in the game. They need to play Barnes on one side, Murphy on the other, and the boy Gordon through the middle. He's done that for England in the European Championships. He's got the pace to burn him behind. They've got to try some way to try and find a different option, because the Wilson thing is not going to work if Isak is unavailable. Right, okay, let's move on, because it's time for the big one. Two mediocre, subpar teams colliding in a nautical city in the north of Spain, in the Basque region of Bilbao. It's the Europa League Final, and it's live on talkSPORT. Okay, Tottenham against Manchester United live on talkSPORT, one of 4 European finals that are live on talkSPORT. Crook is in the departure lounge as we speak. Well, in the hotel across the road from the departure lounge. Just about to get his, what do you want, EasyJet, Wizz Air. You're jetting off, are you?
Eurowings via Dusseldorf. So it's a long journey, and it's been a long journey for both these teams to get to this final. So let's hope it doesn't disappoint. This is either going to be 5-4 and an absolute belter, Manchester United Lyon style, or it'll be 0-0 and one of the teams will win 60-59 on penalties.
Yes, it's going to be a fascinating game, isn't it, Kevin? Because these are two teams that have had a miserable season, but they know that at the end of the season, if they've qualified for the Champions League via winning this trophy, no one will care.
Absolutely, no one will care. This is what everybody's in it for, to win trophies. And I think Ange Postecoglou has been absolutely right that this is an enormous moment for Tottenham. I think he has been quite annoyed. Among many things that annoy him, he's been very annoyed about people trying to minimise this and trying to talk about, well, the league form's been awful. It has. Nobody's disputing that. But if Tottenham win a trophy, a major trophy, for the first time in a long time, and they win a major European trophy and qualify for the Champions League, although actually, for me, that's in the background. It's the trophy that counts. Then he's achieved, and he's done what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to win a trophy in his second season, and he's been pilloried for that, and I understand why, but he might have the last laugh. And if he leaves, which I think he may well do in the summer, that's kind of the ultimate mic drop. If he wins that trophy, gives Spurs fans what they've wanted for so long, and then walks away. It's not a great look for UEFA. It's not a great look for European football, I have to say, because you have two teams that have really struggled in the Premier League who've managed to blast their way through to the final. I think that underlines the concerns about inequality. You've said this for as long as I can remember, Sam. A Premier League team, most of the time, should be able to win a European tie because of the financial advantages and the squad advantages they have. And that's been true in the Conference League, and it's been true in the Europa League as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how bad a look it is, really, because you've got two iconic clubs that are well followed across the world.
Not in that way.
So actually,
but in the sense that the Premier League is so strong. I mean, these are huge clubs. That's great for UEFA. But just in terms of the inequality, it's not Tottenham's fault. It's not United's fault. It's a system.
I think going down the line, if you're looking at it from a global and holistic point of view, it is a problem.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at it from UEFA trying to sell the final to everybody and get eyeballs on it, I think it's a great final for them. Because these are two brilliant clubs that a lot of people identify with, and even the neutrals want to see what happens with it because it's such an intriguing final as well. I mean, one of the questions that sort of the producer was asked here, but something that we sort of discussed in the build up to the podcast this morning was, who actually is the favourites going in? And I don't know. And I haven't looked at the odds, but I don't know, because it's if you threw up the two teams 10 times out of 11, they'd fall down the same time. You flip a coin, it is very 50-50. And I think what you said was really key. For you, the most important thing is the trophy. The getting into the Champions League is secondary. I think that's true for Tottenham Hotspur. Definitely the trophy is all important. For Manchester United, I actually think the trophy is something we do, every single year anyway. I know that we have had a really bad time over the last 10 years. I'm talking from a Manchester United perspective. But they always put a trophy on the board, it seems, every now and again. Getting into the Champions League could be transformative in terms of attracting players, having the revenue to buy players, being in a different PSR scenario. I think for them, getting into the top competition is the key.
I'm 100% with you. And I said a couple of weeks ago now on air that Tottenham's desperation to win a trophy, and I do think it's desperation, certainly amongst the fans, might be their undoing because it heaps so much pressure, whereas I would expect United just to treat this as another cup final. They've got to 9 finals in 10 years at a time when obviously the club is nowhere near the powerhouse that it used to be. This would be 3 trophies in successive seasons. it's a dressing room that we know turns up for the big occasion. They did it against Man City in the FA Cup final last year. They've did it along the way, or done it along the way to this final. And Tottenham have got injuries in midfield. You know, their midfield has been absolutely bombed by injuries. And if United just turn up, be professional, dictate that midfield, they should win. I would make them narrow favourites, but you just never know with these two teams.
The three occasions that these two teams have met earlier in the season have all gone the way of Tottenham Hotspur. In fact, both the meetings last year did as well. Ange Postecoglou's got something over Manchester United, hasn't he, Kev?
He does seem to, but I think Crookie's right in the sense that United do have experience of these occasions in recent seasons. They do have big game players. They do have players that go, right, okay, I might not turn up for, the league game, but I'll turn up for this. And I think that is a factor. I think Kulusevski being out, Maddison being out, I think that's enormous for Tottenham. Kulusevski, I think, is such an important player for them. So to miss him is huge. And I do just think this seems really simplistic, but I do actually just think Tottenham are too easy to play against. I think there are things that Ange has brought to that team in terms of the attacking sense, but even that's kind of, flickered in and out. I guess the one thing, I'm almost arguing with myself here, but the one thing that has been impressive, they went to Norway, and you were right. You were right, Sam, actually. They went to Norway, and they actually played really professionally. And they didn't concede that first goal, and you did say that would happen. They didn't concede that first goal, and because of that, they saw it through. They went to Frankfurt. They really surprised me. They played really well, saw it through. So they do have that strength of character. But I just think this brings such an enormous level of pressure and scrutiny and desire to win it, but fear that you won't. I think United might nick it as well.
And that is this game in a nutshell. You can sit and talk about it as much as you like, but you end up arguing with yourself because you can't convince yourself one way or the other that Manchester United or Tottenham are good enough to win the trophy. So it may end up going the distance. You might be in for a very long night. The whole debate around the game is conflicted because there's part of you that can see the merits in what Ange Postecoglou has done going forward, but yet you know that the defensive side of the game has been poor for most of the campaign, but yet they've got over the line in those big games against Bodo Glimt and against Frankfurt with Manchester United. You look at them and you think, well, they've had an absolutely dreadful time in the league. I think they're 8 games without a win in the Premier League in this current run. That's a terrible run of form. Yet, when it came to playing Chelsea on Friday night, they played a much stronger team than expected. I actually think very similar team to the one that you're going to see when we get to Bilbao on Wednesday. And yet, they dominated that game, looked like they could have got in front. The difference being they don't have a focal point because Rasmus Højlund, and he is still a kid. He's a human being. He's come from Italian football. He's played in Danish football previously. He's struggled to settle really anywhere. He's never scored goals consistently, and he certainly hasn't done that at Manchester United, but he looks a shadow of the player that Manchester United need in a big occasion like this.
His confidence looks shot to pieces, and I think there's an argument, and they did it in the FA Cup final last year, did it well, to not start a striker, to play Bruno Fernandes as that false number 9. It'd be really harsh on Rasmus because actually his best performances and his bulk of his goals have come in Europe. But this is effectively a Premier League game in a European setting. And in a Premier League game, too often he comes up short, he gets bullied, doesn't seem to be using that pace that I think he's got. But again, confidence has just eroded away. So a big call to make for Ruben Amorim. Fernandes as the false 9, Mason Mount and Garnacho in behind. Garnacho's not been brilliant this season and was partly culpable for the Chelsea goal because he just allowed Reece James to turn him inside out. But I think that would be a better option than sticking with someone who just looks like he'd rather be anywhere else but leading the line for Manchester United at this moment in time.
Yeah, it's a shame for him because he is a young player with promise, I think, but he's at the wrong club at the wrong time. And actually, there was a moment in that game where he receives the ball on the edge of the penalty area, and you can almost see the thinking that he's going through before taking his shot. That just shouts, "I have lost my confidence." And then when Maguire scores the disallowed goal on Friday night, he gets into the penalty area ahead of Rasmus Højlund. there should be a scenario there where Rasmus Højlund is saying to him, "Mike, get out of the way. I'm going in there," and darting in front of the defender and putting that in the back of the net, because that's his job, not really Maguire's. But Maguire's almost having to do those sort of things to help Manchester United look as if they've got a bit of a goal threat. So, look, I do think it's going to be edge of your seat stuff. When they met in the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup, it was an absolute goal fest, which Spurs took them apart really in the first half and then ended up sort of making themselves very nervous in the second half of the game. But yeah, it's going to be a fascinating football match, I think. It could either be 8-8 or it might just be 1-0.
I think it'd be full of fear. I'd be pleasantly surprised if it's another slugfest. I think this is going to be
it'd be tight,
quite a horrible watch in some ways. I think it's going to be pretty brutal. Finals often are. They're often decided by fairly small details, and I cannot remember for a long time a European final that's had so much on the line for both teams, in the sense that the entire season rests on it. For Spurs, as we've said, it's about the trophy. For United, it's about trying to drag something out of this season and get that money from the Champions League, but also to win a European trophy, because they obviously were embarrassed by Villarreal in that Europa League final when they had that extraordinarily long penalty shootout, so they missed out there. So this is one I think they do really want to win for various reasons, but I think it's going to be full of fear. I think it's going to be one of those finals that's just like, all the way through.
As I've mentioned several times on this podcast, the disappointment for me is that the English teams have not won many European trophies in comparison to what I think they should have done over the last 20 years. You dominate with the financial scenario across Europe so much. You have some of the best teams, but when it comes to European competition, they've won 3 Champions Leagues and 3 Europa Leagues since 2010. They are going to win another one this year, but by virtue of the fact that they're playing each other in the final. So look, that is a disappointment. So we do need to put more European trophies on the board, and we're certainly going to do that this week at some point. Who will it go? My only regret about this week is that I'm not watching it with Herr Crook, who is going to be in Bilbao for talkSPORT. So that is a shame for me, because I would love to be on a sofa somewhere with a couple of pints sitting next to that fella as that final unfolds. It's almost time to bid well to this season. However, this weekend saw the fans at Everton bid well to the grand old lady of Goodison Park. 133 years. It was an amazing day, and I think they sent off Goodison Park brilliantly. Evertonians everywhere were paying tribute. A bittersweet moment for many, but a perfect ending with a 2-0 victory over Southampton. The last goals scored there in the Premier League by Iliman Ndiaye. Congratulations to him. No one will forget that. There's some brilliant stories. There was the guy whose dad took him to his first Everton game at Goodison Park, died a couple of years ago. He brought his ashes to Goodison Park for the final day, booked a seat, put the ashes on the seat, and then said that I watched the final game at Goodison Park with my dad. And I just thought that was just an amazing emotional story. And there's probably many tales like that from yesterday. The speeches from the ex-players were great as well. It was really well done, I thought, Crook.
Yeah, it was, and as I say, that's what football is all about. It's become a corporate empire now. It's become an entertainment business, but you can't take away the memories. You can't take away the memories of those Palace fans. Many of those would have been watching them with kids and dads and grandkids, and it was the same at Goodison. And you're right. I think football does these sentimental occasions well. Everton certainly did with all the legends. I was particularly pleased to see Graham Sharp back there and getting a hero's welcome, because he took a lot of stick towards the end of the previous regime, and probably a lot of that was unwarranted. I think it's a bit sad that we won't be seeing Premier League football at Goodison Park anymore. I hate the fact they've already sold the naming rights to Bramley Moor Dock, but yeah, let's just enjoy the moment. And they were always going to win, weren't they? I mean, again, if you could handpick a team for your final game at Goodison Park, you want to guarantee 3 points. Just welcome Southampton, who didn't have a single shot on or off target in the first half.
What makes me laugh about this is you're so romantic about Goodison Park, but you've never even been.
It's the one Premier League ground I've been outside, but yeah, I've not been inside. But some great moments at Goodison Park, and there'll be many more at the new stadium. And by the way, quick credit to David Moyes, because they were in big trouble when he came in. They're 20 points clear of relegation now. He's done an exceptional job.
That says more about the relegation 3 than anything else, though, doesn't it? Jamie Vardy got a send-off he deserved as well. 500th game, and he got his 200th goal for the club. What's next for him?
I still think he could do a job in the Premier League for someone. You know, I still think...
That's where he wants to be.
Yeah, I think if you were Palace, for example, and you looked at somebody like him, he still has that now, still has that goal-scoring ability. And if you look at what Glasner's done with strikers generally in his coaching career, he does a really, really good job with strikers. And I think he's the kind of player that if Palace are looking to strengthen that squad for Europe, get the numbers in, I think he could do a really good job. I still think he has those instincts. I still think he has that desire to do well. So I'd like to see him still in the Premier League, but you know, I think there'll be lots of clubs around the world that will be looking at him and thinking, well, there's somebody we can pick up and can do a job for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conventional wisdom is that, you know, Jamie Vardy's 38, he's finishing the Premier League, he's going to go and play in the MLS, or he's going to play somewhere where it's a little bit lighter in terms of workload. I just don't really see Jamie Vardy as that sort of character. I don't think he's ready to put his feet up yet. I think he wants to keep chugging his Red Bulls and his ham and cheese omelette before a game and keep fighting through.
Yeah, it was interesting, the point that I think it was Troy Deeney made yesterday and said, look, maybe joining with Henry Winter, it might have been who said it, joining one of those newly promoted teams possibly isn't the right move because he's not someone who can play week in, week out now in the Premier League. So maybe he's better at a mid-ranking side where he can just come off the bench and make an impact. He still scored goals this season in one of the 3 worst teams in the division. And I agree with you. I think you look at the story of his career, I think he will feel actually, because my understanding is that Leicester never actually sat down and offered him a new contract, that he might just want to prove a point.
Needs a good coach. Got to have a good coach. I think if he gets somebody that can really appreciate him for what he is and just, you know, keep those tweaks going and tune it towards him, you know, somebody like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but somebody like Thomas Frank, for example, at Brentford would get a tune out of him, absolutely, because he's so smart at recognising what players' strengths are. Look at Wissa. I mean, the job he's done with Johan Wissa is extraordinary, and he's absolutely maximising what he can do. I think he could do that with somebody like Vardy.
Wissa and Mbeumo, by the way, 20 goals each this season.
Unbelievable. I mean, both great players, but that is coaching. That really is coaching. I mean, they've done their bit, obviously, but that is a guy creating a framework that gets the most out of them. I think he's a fabulous coach. I really do.
Kev, thank you very much. Enjoyed the Europa League final in midweek. I don't know where you'll be watching it or listening to it, but make sure that somewhere you've got access to a phone to keep tabs on Alex Crook. Are you wired up to a heart rate monitor for this final, Crook? That would be fun.
I'm just thinking I might not come back from Bilbao if it goes badly.
If ever you needed a watch along or a live stream, this is absolutely it, isn't it? This is absolutely it. Crook Cam.
Crook and O'Hara together, that would be fun. Right. We'll see you a little bit later on. In fact, we'll see you on Thursday after the Europa League final to review what happened in Bilbao, but also to look ahead to the final weekend of the Premier League. The big games just don't stop coming. Wednesday night, the Europa League final. Saturday, the Championship playoff final is live on talkSPORT. Sunderland and Sheffield United hoping to join the Premier League. The final day of the Premier League is Sunday, with so much to play for in the race for the Champions League. We'll preview it all on Thursday, so come back and see us then.